All right, I want to show you some new polling in the Republican presidential race as reported by Fox News. Here's a screen grab from the website Rare of Fox's coverage of a poll out yesterday from Quinnipiac. You got your Jeb Bush, your Ben Carson, your Mike Huckabee, even your Donald Trump. Do you notice anyone missing? Think for a second. Maybe a certain Kentucky senator? Because in that Quinnipiac poll, Rand Paul got 7% support, better than half of the candidates shown there. Yet Fox kept him off their graphic while including 5 potential candidates who did worse than Paul did. Now, hey, maybe that was just an oversight, except it's not the first time this sort of thing has happened. 2 weeks ago, Rare noted, Fox News did not even include Paul in its own poll of head-to-head matchups against Hillary Clinton, though there was room for long shots like Carly Fiorina. The exclusion of Paul may have something to do with the fact that he is public enemy number 1 for many on the right now, and many of his critics have been making their case on Fox News.
He's completely off the wall. There's no way the Republican Party is going to nominate somebody like that. The question is how much damage he's going to do in the meantime. And the answer apparently is quite a lot.
Now, Paul has never been particularly well liked in the GOP, but the antipathy has really boiled over for 2 reasons. 1, Paul's claim on this network that Republican hawks are to blame for the rise of ISIS, and 2, his partnering with progressives to try to roll back the Patriot Act, 3 key provisions of which are set to expire at midnight on Sunday. Paul seems to be relishing that fight, raising money off battles with his, quote, spy state apologists, and telling a cheering crowd today there's a little bit of a war in Washington between Paul and an establishment he casts as unconcerned with personal freedom. This weekend, the Senate will gather for a rare Sunday session to try to extend those Patriot Act provisions, and Paul, in turn, plans to stand in the way. The pro-Paul super PAC is certainly pumped for the fight.
The head of the Washington spy machine, Barack Obama, and his so-called conservative accomplices, the capitulating Canadian, Ted Cruz.
Expiration of the Patriot Act provisions, including the most controversial so-called provision 215, which the NSA has used to collect millions of Americans' phone records, was unthinkable just 2 years ago. Today, President Obama warned that letting them expire could be disastrous and potentially mean the failure to prevent a terrorist attack. Joining me now, Brian Darling, former senior communications director and counsel to Senator Rand Paul. All right, Brian, this is the big test case that I think is fascinating here, which is how much of a constituency is there in modern conservative and the modern Republican Party for this fight on the Patriot Act, right? You can look at it in a certain way. You can say, look, conservatives, small government, skeptical of government overreach, like the Bill of Rights, etc. They should be all in on this. That's not the way sort of mainstream conservative outlets are treating it. What do you think ends up being the result of this?
I think Rand Paul is a leader of a movement, and he's leading the charge on the Fourth Amendment and making it so that the American people understand that, you know, the conservatives love the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, but also the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy, the right to have privacy in your home. The fact that the government can't just issue one general warrant and spy on all Americans. I think that resonates with conservatives. Conservatives believe in limited small government.
But see, this is the problem. And I have had these arguments with folks who are sort of on this side of things all the time. This is a no true Scotsman problem, because you can say, well, conservatives believe in this, right? But actual real conservatives have no problem with stop and frisk when there's a battle over stop and frisk here in New York City, which is a massive violation of the Fourth Amendment, to my mind. The actual real conservatives here were the ones on the side of, quote, law and order and stop and frisk. The actual real conservatives out there, that is the people in America who call themselves conservatives and vote in Republican primaries, don't actually seem to be bothered by this.
I think they are. I disagree. I think average Americans are bothered by this. They're bothered when they see what happened in Ferguson when you have military. It looked like the military was being rolled out in an American city. I think conservatives are now talking, and Rand Paul's leading, on criminal justice reform and trying to push back and roll back some of the things that were supported by Republicans and Democrats. Let's not forget that Bill Clinton pushed through legislation and signed into law a bill that was very harmful for a lot of African Americans.
So let me ask this question too, because part of the issue here is if Paul is going to sort of wage this campaign, you talked about him leading a movement, which I think may be true, but that doesn't necessarily get you to a plurality of voters. there's this question of how long he can stay. And I thought there was an interesting piece from Politico about the fact that there's no big billionaire rising to the fore to essentially be the backer for Rand Paul, which I'm sure someone could sort of turn around and take as a badge of pride. But there is a funding issue, particularly when you've got all these other candidates who do have essentially sponsors that can keep them in it for the long run.
Yeah, but money isn't going to win it. You can have billionaires running super PACs, but it didn't push Rick Santorum over the finish line in the last election cycle. It didn't push Newt Gingrich over the finish line. There were billionaires behind those guys. Bottom line is you have Rand Paul, who's leading a movement of small donors. He's going to have a huge universe of donors, just like his dad, but they're not going to be as big. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing. I think that he is the leader of this large movement, and the American people are starting to roll in behind it. Don't denigrate his chances. I mean, he's doing very well in the polls. His dad did very well in Iowa. He got over 20% in Iowa. His dad got over 20% in New Hampshire in the last election cycle. He can build off that, and he can win.
The question about his dad is precisely the issue, right? Because what I see the Republican field and Fox News doing right now, particularly in the way they've gone after that ISIS comment to Joe Scarborough the other day, is to put Rand Paul in the position of his father, which was Ron Paul would be there, and sure, he had a lot of money and he had a lot of supporters, but he would get up and he would say these things on foreign policy that made sense to a lot of anti-imperialists around the country, but not a lot of sense to a lot of Republican primary voters, and they would beat the crap out of him on stage. And I can see the other Republicans salivating on that.
I don't see that. Rand Paul he's the only member of the Senate that's put together an active war resolution to declare war against ISIS, because he believes that the Constitution says that Congress has a say. Congress needs to authorize these wars. I think you have to look at it in two ways. One way is there's a Republican fight, a battle over the future of the party, but it's also a battle of the establishment and Democrats. You know, you have Barack Obama engaging in many of the same policies that he criticized President Bush for engaging in.
It's interesting in the Super PAC ad, right? The question is how much mileage you can get out of the fact that President Obama is now the president. And I think ultimately sort of the fear factor about this stuff is going to trump. But we'll see. Brian Darling, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Still ahead, my interview with actress Rashida